According to Yves Saint Laurent, fashion photography is the living, sophisticated spark of a certain moment in time frozen forever. It's more than just a means of selling clothes. It crystallizes the tastes and aspirations of an era. In the beginning, fashion photography was indistinguishable from the designs. A century later, however, the clothing is often just a pretext for some forms of artistic photography. Before photography was used in the press, fashion was the sole realm of the designers.
The first photos were in the 50s. In other words, it came along with haute couture. And once the bourgeoisie, with their extremely important social status in banking and commerce, chose to portray themselves as the aristocracy had done in the 18th century, images changed from being pictorial to photographic.
À ce moment-là, elle devient photographique.
The Countess of Castiglione, a figurehead of the Second Empire, wanted to be portrayed in her clothes and costumes. Louis Pierson photographed her for a quarter of a century. Les Modes was the first magazine to publish a large number of photos. The models were usually show business stars. After theater and music, Studio Rüttlinger was attracted to the fashion world. The photos were taken in the same conditions as the portrait, which was the first vocation of the studio, founded in 1850. At the turn of the century, the Seeberger brothers took the first exterior fashion photos. Jules, Louis, and Henri scored the elegant side of Paris and the horse races to give fashion a dynamic image.
When she saw the quality and composition of these photos, Madame de Broutel, who ran a magazine called La Mode Pratique, asked Jules to take some fashion photographs in public places, such as at the racetrack or the Smart Set out walking on the Champs-Élysées or in the Bois de Boulogne, and to do a feature on the clothes of the rich and the aristocrats, which could be used to illustrate articles on fashion.
Photography is a family affair for the Seebergers. The children learned it from their parents. Later they took over from them, taking photographs for the top fashion magazines. Adolphe de Meyer frequented and photographed the aristocracy before turning exclusively to fashion photography.
Fashion photography was no longer documentary. Fashion photography was no longer promotional. Fashion photography was now documentary, promotional, and artistic.
Baron de Meyer's photographs were first published in Vogue in 1914. He used light to interpret clothing. When he became head of Vogue's photographic department, he made the use of backlighting de rigueur. But his misty style soon no longer suited the magazine, which had always wanted to be at the forefront of fashion. In 1923, he left Vogue to join their rival, Harper's Bazaar. Meanwhile, Edward Steichen took over Vogue's studio in New York. He abandoned Baron de Meyer's hazy style and imposed a more robust, composed style. In the 30s, Harper's Bazaar, run by Carmel Snow and art director Alexei Brodovich, renewed the genre. By grasping the instantaneity of movement, Munkacsy introduced the basis of contemporary fashion photography. He gave American women a dynamic modern image. The clothes became lively and an integral part of the model's personality.
An art director is there really to aid communication between the various people present at a photo shoot. It requires a lot of preparation beforehand. And his role in a magazine is to provide the right mix between the photographer's different subjects and styles.
In 1934, Horst replaced Huyenengan Huene, his mentor and friend, at the head of the Parisian studios of Vogue. He was inspired by his classical style, his ancient Greek themes, but added a touch of humor and refinement. He used accessories and decor to give the clothes a sensitivity, a playful, sometimes theatrical dimension. His conception of fashion was in phase with the superficial desires of the interwar years. The Second World War put fashion photography on hold. Photographers could not ignore the material situation, and women adapted and adopted more functional clothes. Immediately after the war, the magazine Elle was full of practical advice and advocated resourcefulness. In the 40s and 50s, New York became the fashion capital for photography, particularly thanks to Irving Penn. After several years at Harper's Bazaar, Penn met Alexander Liberman, Vogue's art director, an encounter that proved decisive. He was hired by him in 1943. Irving Penn instilled his photos with his personal vision of fashion. His compositions are extremely pure. The clothes are evoked more than represented.
Some images were so significant, particularly photos by Irving Penn, with silhouettes that were so exaggerated, so precise that when I saw the clothes in real life, I was disappointed, because they weren't as silhouetted, as beautiful, because of all the techniques and tricks of photography. You can play with the clothes, exaggerate the silhouette, perfect the pose to make the leg look more slender, and so on. There are lots of things you can do with photography to accentuate and sublimate the lines and silhouettes. So I was a little disappointed when I saw the reality because I was addicted to the images.
The photography fed the fashion and the fashion fed the photography. And it was all influenced by music and film and England and, you know, whatever was going on then. I think the photography, and once it's seen in the magazines, ups the level of the fashion. And then everyone's more and more aware of fashion.
I learned about fashion through photography. I didn't study fashion. I looked at the magazines and I saw photos by some very good and some not so good photographers. And so my whole fashion culture is visual, from television and fashion photos.
Sometimes a photographer's personality is so strong that it triumphs over trends and taboos. This was the case with Helmut Newton. For him, fashion was not an end, just a means of provoking and expressing his own vision.
I'm inspired by the cinema and by paparazzi photos that I find extraordinary. I think the paparazzi's approach is really amazing.
The women in Newton's photos are often dominant, always independent. Fashion is generally associated with sex, money, and seduction, and expresses the photographer's obsessions and fantasies. Fetishism, perversion, and the failings of contemporary society are pinpointed in a universe of luxury, which is necessary to the expression of desire.
I have certain obsessions, I think, about women, among other things. I photograph a certain social class. I'm not Cartier-Bresson. I don't portray real life. It's a life which is real, but which is recreated.
In the 70s, Paris became the mecca of fashion again. French Vogue gave photographers unparalleled freedom. Alongside Helmut Newton, Guy Bourdin was the star photographer. Sex and violence are an integral part of his photographs. Bourdin is inspired by the atmosphere of crime reports, but his aesthetic sense relies heavily on makeup. His photos for Jourdan shoes made him famous and marked a turning point in advertising photography. The product lost all functional value in a composition which aimed to take it out of its usual context and give it its own existence. Bourdin has shocked right-thinking people, but has always managed to apply his personal vision to his commissioned work. Fashion photographers in the 80s had to deal with a new phenomenon. Their models were stars.
Photographers choose their models because they are inspired by them. They have a precise idea of what they want to use them for. So it's more a case of inspiration. It's not calculating. The photographer thinks of himself first. A chief editor could say, I really like, I'm a really big fan of that girl and I'd like to work with her. But she never has the final word on who gets chosen. The photographer does. As he's the one behind the camera, he's the one who has to be inspired. He acts on his instincts and has the final say.
After 10 years in front of the camera as a model, Ellen von Unworth coordinated the Guess Jeans advertising campaign, which really launched both her and Claudia Schiffer. The photographer's eye is sexy, intimate, and exuberant. Patrick de Marchelier symbolizes today's trends, emphasis on the models and simplicity of composition. His photos exude a healthy atmosphere. Jean-Baptiste Mondino was the precursor to a new generation of photographers. As a graphic designer, art director, director of advertising films and video clips, and designer of record sleeves, he makes full use of the latest technologies. Color is used to give a positive idea of fashion and provides women with liberated rather than sophisticated models. Another protégé of the Vogue stable, the Peruvian Mario Testino, loves women who are sure of themselves.
There's a return to a classical style, to certain surefire values. Maybe it's because there are so many uncertain things in the world. We're not even certain of being able to go out into the street, so we're trying to cling to things which have a degree of certainty about them, and I try to reflect that in an elegance which can be timeless.
If clothing has pride of place in Mario Testino's photographs, he's constantly navigating between his use of black and white, well-mannered classicism, and more modern colors. His photos contain an incredible amount of energy, according to Madonna, and an extraordinary sensual quality, according to Gucci couturier Tom Ford. Dominique Isserman successfully switches between fashion, advertising, and video clips. Her sophisticated photos have made her a favorite with many top bands who give her a free hand. Peter Lindbergh grew up in West Germany between a bank of the industrialized River Rhine and another covered with trees. The memory of this childhood world is still fresh in his mind, and he's always preferred to make use of contrast. His work is often associated with certain models and fashion designers. Lindbergh believes in body language, nature, and emotions, and he gives his black and white photos a very cinematic feel. His preferred technique is using different nuances of gray.
I don't think fashion photography necessarily has to be trendy or something that's of the moment. I mean, the clothes very well could be, but I think when I tend to do a photograph, I like to make a photograph with the fashion being part of the whole picture. It isn't just about the clothes or how they look. To me, it's important that it works as a story or a photographic essay, or the picture will hopefully hold up over time. You know, it used to be where a photograph was about just showing the clothes, but more and more sometimes it's about the mystery of it.
You know, it's a challenge, you know, everything's a challenge. Your fingernails, everything. End up with the jaws. Yeah. Yeah, you got it. You're doing great. Amazing. Head back there.
David LaChapelle lived in New York during the 80s, and he portrayed the damage caused by AIDS and drugs. Everyone started wearing black, and that's all there is now. At times, it feels like we're all in mourning, he said. As a reaction against this, LaChapelle preaches the use of shocking pink. He insists on the fact that he's a photographer and not a computer scientist, so he finds it more fun to photograph real life than create on a computer.
If you cross a certain boundary, then it's no longer valid in fashion. Like if it's ugly or if it's vulgar, then it loses its credit, you know, and people don't take it seriously. They just write it off. So there's a very thin line between beauty and edge. You have to show the clothes because it is a fashion photograph, but beyond that, they give you so much freedom.
Clothes for me are still life. I've always seen the material as a still life, be it different kinds of cloths, embroidery, the sheen of silk, or the matte look of cotton. Only a woman's skin to me is living skin.
Because he's been taking photographs of fashion and beauty for so long, Tien knows all about the importance of the clothing, and he magnifies it, often to the detriment of the model. Tien does not hesitate to crop off faces or concealing them in shadow. Everything must help to sublimate the material and the colors in a space where fixedness and movement alternate.
I think that clothes are the most important thing in a fashion photograph, and the model is just a part of the whole, for me anyway. I don't need a celebrity to wear a couturier's dress. I don't like mixing things. When there are too many celebrities in a photo, it becomes a weekend magazine. When I photograph a dress for a publicity shot, it's almost a way of correcting my work. It lets me see my own work as a fashion designer with an objective eye. I can see the good and the bad. I see what I shouldn't have done, where I went wrong. In a photo, things can be corrected which can't be on the catwalk. So it's very interesting. It lets me stay in touch with fashion all year long. Otherwise, I just do my collections and go on vacation the rest of the year, like certain other people, which would bother me a lot.
Boosted by the success of his photographs for Chanel, Karl Lagerfeld has been able to give his creativity and talent a free rein. Inspired by Oskar Schlemmer, a German sculptor and painter from the 20s, Lagerfeld chose to have his models pose in Schlemmer's fantastic abstract costumes. Clothing is a pretext for a dreamlike composition which is closer to painting than formal fashion.
The biggest problem is to invent the present. You invent the present by being simple and clear, not by trying to copy another photographer, but perhaps by being inspired by an idea. Photographers who stick to what their predecessors did make wonderful pastiches, but they don't take things forward at all. Whereas photographers who embark on a new idea, on a new, obsessive way of looking at things, are the ones who really fully develop their talent.
Richard Avedon subscribes to this school of thought. For more than 50 years, he's brought new energy to photography. In 1945, he presented his portfolio to Alexei Brodovich, art director at Harper's Bazaar, who became his mentor. 20 years later, Vogue headhunted him. His presentation of fashion is simple, almost classical. The apparent spontaneity of his model is precisely orchestrated. If the neutral backgrounds are a recurrent theme, the compositions are often more complex. And if fashion is often a matter of style and era, when it's seen through Avedon's eyes, it's all about timelessness and personality.
His imagination is limitless, and he has a metaphorical vision of existence and an immediate understanding of people, added to which a perfect eye. In other words, the eye is more intelligent than the rest of the head. This ability to grasp things in a moment that other people don't see at all.
Avedon prefers the study of movement to narration. In this, he's a direct descendant of Martin Munkaczy, who was the first to shake up the fashion world. Avedon's genius is to combine movement with the static studio tradition. You can't freeze fashion any more than you can freeze time, and so the passing of time is an integral part of his work.
The ultimate expression of performance, extremely stylized and self-conscious behavior, is of course fashion. In fashion, everything, hair, makeup, is used to create a performance. So many portraits in the history of art are fashion portraits, fashion images, as are so many beautiful Klimts, Goya, Velázquez. All the court paintings are, in a sense, fashion portraits. Photographs are hallucinations. My photographs are my hallucinations, and like hallucinations, they are shot through with a surreal, erotic possibility. Erotic possibilities and death. Like all things hallucinatory, they are never far from the power of myth. And I have been surprised more than once by the power of my own unconscious.
Richard Avedon did a series called The Passerby of the Century for Egoist. Stephanie Seymour passes through a century of fashion photography without aging whatsoever. Avedon fuses fashion and the passing of time, life, and its procession of passersby. As he so eloquently put it, Fashion is not the short-lived reflection of elegance, it's the continuous sparkle of time.
Fashion is one of the richest expressions of human desires, ambitions, needs, frailty, insecurity, security. Yes, beautiful. What we wear is an indication of our sense of ourselves. It's a gift. Look what they're wearing in the Whistlers. And what they're wearing is fashion.
Fashion is a pretext for approaching a woman, stealing her body, penetrating her gaze, drinking in her quivering skin, her trembling leg, trying to breathe in some of her soul, be it perverse or innocent. Fashion is also a pretext for sculpting strange clothed statues who are longing to move, but who are frozen by the camera's shutter. Thanks to photography, fashion is more than fashion. It's a long, great moment of eternity.